Welcome, everyone. We're so happy that you could join us today. I'm Nina Tiger from Sage Eldercare in Summit, New Jersey. I'm the project coordinator of Your Decisions Matter, a program funded by Atlantic Health System's Chilton and Overlook Medical Center's Community Advisory Boards. Your Decisions Matter encourages all of us to talk about what matters in our individual healthcare, ideally before a medical crisis occurs. Program participants are provided with tips and tools on how to have these often difficult conversations, including how to start and what to be sure to say. We offer free programs in our community, now virtually, but hopefully soon we'll all be back to in-person events. You'll all be receiving an email with information about our program and our panelists. We're honored today to be joined by 4 community faith leaders from Summit, New Jersey. Reverend Emilie Boggis from the Beacon Universalist congregation, Rabbi Avi Friedman from Congregation or Shalom, Reverend Charles Rush from Christ Church, and Reverend Vernon Williams from Fountain Baptist Church. This past Friday, April 16th, was National Healthcare Decisions Day. This nationwide day exists to inform people about the importance of advanced care planning, both to have a conversation with your loved ones and medical team about what matters to you in your healthcare and execute the necessary documents. Today's webinar is part of our series celebrating National Healthcare Decisions Day. We're going to be talking about how different faiths view healthcare decision-making and the importance of sharing what matters to you. We encourage you all to ask questions or make a comment. Please use the chat or question box at the bottom of your screen. So welcome, panelists. Emilie, let's start with you. If you could just quickly introduce yourself and talk about your religious tradition and position.
Yeah, so I'm the Reverend Emilie Boggis, and I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I'm, as you said, I'm one of the co-ministers at Beacon Unitarian Universalist in Summit, New Jersey.
Rabbi Friedman.
Good afternoon. My name is Avi Friedman, and I am the rabbi at Congregation or Shalom in Summit, New Jersey, where I've been the rabbi for 15 years. We are affiliated with the conservative movement in Judaism.
Reverend Williams.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vernon Williams. I am an associate minister at the Fountain Baptist Church in Summit, and I serve as the assistant to the pastor there at Fountain.
And Reverend Rush.
Yes, welcome. I'm glad to see everybody. My name's Chuck Rush. I'm the senior minister at Christ Church in Summit, and I've been here for about 25 years. We're a mainline Protestant church affiliated with the United Church of Christ, although increasingly these days it seems we've got people from almost every religious tradition that are part of our congregation. That's just the way it is. And I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you all so much. So the first question I wanted to talk about is, for people of faith, advanced care planning can be simultaneously a theological, medical, and legal process. What are your thoughts on advanced care planning? Rabbi Friedman?
Yeah, Avi.
You know, when involved in interfaith dialogue, Christians always do this to Jews. They say, your tradition is older, you should go first. And they think they're being ecumenical, but okay, I will go first, guys. All joking aside, this is obviously a very serious issue. And, but perhaps if we can, be a little bit lighter about it, we can engage more people in the conversation. So when I think about advanced care planning, I think of it in 2 ways. I think, first of all, that it is a sign of respect for the gift that God has given us, namely our bodies and our lives. We recognize the sanctity of our bodies, and we make plans to care for them and return them to God in a respectful way. But it's also a sign of respect and love for our family members, because we are including them in this incredibly sacred and serious deliberation. But even more importantly, we hope to eliminate the doubt about what we truly want. And we make an already stressful situation, the end of our lives, perhaps a little less stressful for them if there's one piece that they don't need to worry about.
I love how you express that.
And I certainly echo what Rabbi Friedman said. So for Fountain, we encourage our folks to do end-of-life care planning. It's a very stressful, it's a very confusing time for folks. That when death, to just talk about death and dying, what makes it easier is to prepare for it. We prepare for quite a few things. But in preparing for death and dying, it is not disrespect, if you will, for what we believe, God's ultimate authority or sovereignty is, but it is acknowledging that it is a part of life. Death and dying is something that is a part of life, and we need to acknowledge that. However, when that time happens, it can be confusing, it can be disorienting for folks. But what makes it easier is when you've had that conversation that this is what I would like to see done when that moment occurs. It cuts down on confusion. Everyone wants to do the right thing. It makes it easier when your family knows your wishes. It takes a lot of the anxiety out for the family. If something happens and they don't know what your wish is. And also trying to help folks to understand from our theological standpoint is that God would have you to be prudent, especially during this particular moment in your life. And so therefore we encourage our members to do preparation because it just makes it easier to deal with when that moment does occur.
Emilie, is it okay if I go? Yeah, I was just going to say, I think on this subject, not so much that the values of our spiritual tradition have changed all that much. It's that the world around us has changed so much. So the way we apply those is in a completely different format. You think about it, in the Bible, they speak of us living 70. That's 70 years. That is an ancient person. I've sometimes wondered why Christianity has such a long focus in Lent on suffering. And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized it's because in the ancient world, people died young and often, and they didn't really have a chance to fulfill their life. Very few people live to be 70. Aristotle speaks frequently about old age, and he's 50. I think of Beowulf. The characters in the 7th century are sitting around, and they're all ancient warriors, and they're all just approaching 40. And that was how old people lived, and they generally died from circumstances that were beyond their control. So they didn't give much thought to how we end our lives, because very few of them got to bring their lives to completion. And even today, when I think about this issue, I think about it as a generational issue, because I'm seeing a change in attitudes as I talk to younger people going forward. Older people, I'm thinking of the World War II generation in particular, that's now pretty much passing before us as we speak, because everybody in that generation would today be 92 or older, and so most of them have already died. And that generation in particular was very paternalistic in their relationship to their doctor. They just went to the doctor, had great trust in them, didn't direct their care at all, were very deferential, and said the doctor will tell me what's best, and when I die, I die. And they kind of left a lot of things undone at the end of their life. And I don't think it was any fault on their part. It was just that so few of them were able to interiorize that we could outlive our 70. Well, today we know more and more people, whether they're in cancer treatments. I've got somebody right now who's going through stem cell replacement treatments, and in these prolonged situations, they even 10 years ago, in this one man's case, he's 48 years old at the moment, this option was not available to him, even 10 years ago. So he's in a new situation and really about to be booted into a new life. And we have the technical capability, thank God, that we can extend our life, but extend it so far that we now actually have to make conscious decisions about how we're going to end it. And that is why we're here today, because more and more of us are going to find ourselves in a position where we are able to stay technically alive. But the question is, in many cases, is, what is the quality of life that we want to have, and how is that going to play out? And we have to think about this in a way that previous generations never had.
Yeah, I'm so thankful for the four of you going before me. I have to say that I have so many thoughts on this, and that for me, it's so layered. And the hard part about having it is that there are so many layers. And I know my internet's a little bit spotty. So for me, there's a delay sometimes, and then you all fast forward, your words fast forward. So apologies. I don't know how I sound to you all. But interestingly, we do so much advanced planning for so many other things. And I really think about death as a rite of passage, one of many rites of passage that we go through. And that's really how I hold it theologically, right? So when a new child is born, there is a lot of advanced planning that goes into that. You think about weddings right now, have a 14-year-old. I mean, the amount of work we're doing right now for college planning, or, after she graduates, thinking through that. And yet it really feels like there is a wall around death. And part of it is that our culture doesn't want to address it. It's very interesting, Chuck, to hear you talk. My grandmother turned 92 on April Fool's Day. And I was telling her about, she works 2 jobs, right? Still drives her little red car everywhere. And I was telling her that I was meeting with some futurists. This is probably 2 years ago when she turned 90. I was meeting with some futurists, and they were saying that she has, she probably has the ability to live to 100, maybe 110, and that in future generations, they'll be able to live to 120, 140, 150. And she was like, that sounds like my idea of hell, right? She's like, so I do think that we have to think through, and it's something that we've never done before. We've never had to think through how long we will live and what it requires. And when we have an attitude, which is, I will think about that another day, it really becomes hard. So Nina, what I love about this question is that you asked us about 3 layers, which is theological, medical, and legal. And if you add, you also have to add to that, what are the family dynamics that are involved here? You also have to add to that ethnicity and race, because all of those things are compounded, especially in our country. So today I am coming to you from my mom's house. Today is the anniversary of my father's death. And so in an hour, we're gonna meet my mom's minister and be able to honor his life. And I have to tell you that the journey is so layered. He had type 1 diabetes, which then led to vascular dementia, and then eventually he died from COVID, right on the first wave of COVID. And when he got his diagnosis, of course, it took 3 years to get any sort of diagnosis. They didn't know what it was. So we were in the medical world. Luckily, someone from my mom's church said, go get an eldercare attorney, which then added the legal aspect to it. And then we had the fact that my father had always, because he had type 1 diabetes, he had always said to my brother and me, you just need to take me out in the back and shoot me. Like when I get this diagnosis, like that, those were his words to us. That was his primary message to us. And yet he so desperately wanted to live. And that has been so, as a person, not as a minister. That has been so hard to go through all those layers. And now a year out, thinking through, did we do the right thing? Even when we did so much advanced planning. But I guess the thing I would say to folks is that you have to go through this like a journey and feel like it is a journey. And you have to look at, what are the theological values that I'm bringing to this? They were different for my dad than they were for my mom and my brother and me. And somehow we had to come together on that. Then the medical field basically wants to treat the diagnosis, but doesn't give you the social workers, doesn't give you all of the care. You have to develop that around that. And then there's all of the legal aspects to it. So I honestly feel like no wonder we don't want to deal with it, because it has become so freaking complex that when you get the diagnosis, you just think, what am I going to do? So one of the things that I'm pushing for, and it's one of the reasons that I'm on the Sage Eldercare board in Summit, one of the things I'm pushing for is, how do we give families a holistic response, so that they have all of those, so that other people are walking with them through those many layers. Sorry, I gave you a whole bunch there, but I just want to say that it's complicated and you need the help of others. You cannot go it alone. And I'll stop talking.
I think in our program, we talk a lot about what matters to you, which I think fits well with, I'm assuming, how you all talk to your congregants. And I always read a letter at the end of some of the workshops that a doctor wrote to her children that basically says, if you have a question of how I want to be treated, choose comfort, choose home, choose me being with my family. And I think that message is really powerful in what you're saying, Emilie, because I don't think we know a lot of times if we're doing the right thing. And if we think about that, what matters to you statement, when we think of our loved ones, I think that's a really good way to give ourselves peace of mind when we're dealing with these difficult situations.
And
go ahead.
Nina, I just want to say that, like, I think that message of choose comfort, choose home, choose be with my family, that has been really ingrained. But in order to get to that sort of ideal, it takes systems working together in order to get there. And those systems aren't working together yet. I mean, that is something that we have to do in order to get there, and to understand that we might have to break that promise of choose come and choose family in order to care for our loved one, based on where the system is right now. And that is really hard for families going through that. So much of what I do as a pastor is help people live with themselves, especially caregivers, as they're having to make decisions that go against the promise they've made to their loved ones.
Have you, in your work with families, have you seen a big difference with families who have had these conversations with their loved ones and their medical team, and then people who have not? I know we talk a lot about a good death versus a bad death. I was just wondering what you all thought about that. Or Reverend, go ahead, Reverend Rush. Rabbi Friedman, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Either way, I just want to say one thing, and that is, and I was unfortunately just at Morristown Hospital yesterday with a family in the ICU as a mother passed away. And I will tell you, I have never heard a family say, oh, we talked about these things too much. Whereas I can't count the number of times I've heard families tell me, I wish I had this conversation more. I wish I knew exactly what he or she wanted. So if you're going to err on the side of asking, talking, sharing, thinking through scenarios that you hope you never have to deal with, but you might end up having to deal with.
I just want to contrast sort of two different families, because they're really kind of two different family types. You know, and this has been rare for me too, Avi, but I have had this experience where I've had a family and say dad suddenly has a medical situation that comes up and all four kids are far away. But he's in my church, and so I'm reaching out to all four of them. And when I talk to them on the phone, they all tell me the exact same thing about their dad. This is who he was. This is what he stood for. This is what he would want. This is what we've talked about, and we're in complete agreement on that. And to me, that is like, in terms of, because I think about this subject in terms of family dynamics a lot of times. It's so important if your family is actually working and working well, you'll get some kind of answer like that. Everybody basically says the same thing. And when they come together, it's a really congruent time, even though it's difficult. And by contrast, and this is what has happened so much more often, and we see this particularly over at Overlook Hospital, much more often, you know, just on when we listen to ethics cases that we have that come before the board. There'll be, say, 3 kids, and mom is in distress all of a sudden, and we reach out to the family members to find out, you know, what they're thinking, what they want to have done. 2 of them will be basically in agreement on something. The 3rd one will come in from the outside, let's say California, the state everybody loves to hate, and, you know, has sometimes more, especially economic resources to do something one way or another, but starts to, you know, and is motivated for a lot of very complex reasons that, you know, and this is the part that's really complicated, because sometimes they won't exactly express what their parents want done. This comes out of a sense of need of what they need to have done for one reason or another, or maybe it's in relationship to their brothers and sisters and the way that they want to be seen as, you know, and so they'll come in with this attitude of like, well, I want everything done possible for mom, and I want to make sure that I'm not going to agree to anything except if everything is done. It's not really exactly a thought through position. It's just this kind of statement out there. And when that happens, what ends up happening, especially with the medical personnel, is they go into defensive mode. And instead of being able to treat the patient in the way that they were normally going to treat them, now they want to make sure they're doing everything exactly as it should be, lest they get open themselves to some sort of liability. And it also creates this dynamic with the family. So you've got sort of a protracted fight going on between the siblings as to what's the best way to care for mom. And, you know, I come back to another piece about this that Avi didn't mention, but it, you know, it needs to get out there on the table, especially with siblings. You know, a lot of this, when you go through it, is how do I prevent feeling guilty after I'm expecting my mom's not going to live that long one way or another. How do I keep from feeling guilty about the way that she dies? And that's a big thing. And, you know, I want to say that kind of this answer of like, well, let's just do everything possible. Somehow that's supposed to assuage our guilt. It doesn't actually work, but it seems like it should work. And so I've seen that reaction, and I call that kind of the less functioning, not necessarily dysfunctional family model, because usually the siblings are actually getting along fairly well on every other front except this one thing. And it's how they process the passing of the generations together. That's one dimension of it. And then being able to think not just what I need as my mom's dying and I'm really hurt and afraid and alone and don't want to be the next generation, you know, that's the oldest generation. I have a lot of comfort in knowing that she's been there for me in my life. But to flip that at some point and ask, what would she want? And I think the value of having these conversations and asking people directly, what is it that you would want in various situations over, you know, a long period of time? The value of that is that your kids are much more likely, or your grandchildren, much more likely to be able to express together what it is that you would want, rather than them having to deal with the demons that they have to deal with at these situations. They're just there.
In our tradition, Christian tradition, you know, that, you know, everyone talks about heaven. Everyone wants to go to heaven. And our pastor jokingly says that, you know, while everyone wants to talk about going to heaven, but no one wants to do what it takes to get to heaven. Death and dying is how you get there. I think that, you know, as I think Ivy had mentioned, you know, we need to be able to allow people to talk about it and take the taboo out of death and dying. And one way of doing that is to, you know, in our church, to open that conversation up, to everyone's doubt, everyone's confusion around it. I really don't know what God would want, and to be okay with folks being able to express that, but to be able to have that conversation in a setting in which perhaps that they would feel comfortable in having that. And when we're talking, most people are thinking in their own way, theologically, if you will. What would God have me to do? And I don't want to make so the best place to have that conversation is in our context, within the church setting. So one of the ways our pastors tried to do it, he's tried to preach it from the pulpit, in terms of talking about death and dying, and allowing people that space to be comfortable, or to be free, to be able to express, you know, their concerns, I don't understand this, you know, so that we have that, begin to talk about that and have that conversation. In fact, you know, it's interesting that as a minister and talking about counseling others, it's interesting when it happens to you. You know, so for instance, for me, a few years back with my brother. My brother had a conversation with me, and you know, very strong man, you know, a man of God, and he called me up and said, "Hey, I want you to be my power of attorney." I said, "Okay." And then when the moment came, you know, it takes on a whole new meaning. But now, what made it easier for me is the fact that I had the opportunity to have that conversation within my church setting, to, you know, to talk about it, to talk about my fears, to talk about my doubts. What if I don't make the right decision? And so when it came from my brother, you know, he has an older daughter, ex-wife, and, you know, in California, Chuck. And so I was the one going to California. You know, and the doctors, because I was his power of attorney, the doctors are calling me and saying, "Hey, this is what we think the decisions he needs to make." And so I'm trying to talk to his daughter, whom they, you know, very, very strong people of faith, but, you know, but wanting to believe he's going to be all right. And so I did not have all the information being in New Jersey. And so I had to make the decision. I've got to fly to California and find out what's going on. And, you know, Chuck, in that sense, I was able to go out there and meet with the social worker, who is trying to, you know, say, "Hey, look, you know, he is dying." You know, and they wanted him to go into hospice. And so when they gave me the information as to what was going on, now I've got to try and help him and his daughter to come to terms and to come to grips with what is going on. Didn't know exactly what I would say to him, but he shared with me a story, or he talked to one of my sisters, and they were hurt that he's dying, which is natural. I was hurt, and my sister said something to him that I think kind of hurt him. But I was able to be one who was able to hear it and say, look, she obviously loves you very much. She's just hurt that you're coming to the realization that this is happening. And so I don't think she meant anything, anything by it, but it was, and so in saying to him, look, it's okay for you to say, hey, this is the end of life. This is no way to live. And for me to be able to say to him, it's okay. We will all, get through this. It did something for him to be able to hear that. But I think for folks to get there, we have to help people to have that conversation. And did I know if I was making the right decision? No, I don't. But I have to be able to, that as a person of faith, that I made the best decision with the information that I had, and try to help folks to, to understand, listen, you get the information I'm an engineer by training. And so I can get into that analysis by paralysis, trying to make the best decision. And oftentimes there is no best decision, have to make the decision that is presented, to you. I know that's, it doesn't help folks, but perhaps, we can help folks to try to get beyond or deal, now I shouldn't say get beyond there, but to be able to deal with their guilt and saying you made the best decision with the information that you had. And to be able to help them to understand that as a person of faith, then do you trust that God understands that? Again, it still may not help, but folks want to do the right thing when you don't exactly know all the time what's the right thing, and be comfortable with being able to accept that and still say, I still doubt it,
I also just want to say that, I don't think it's ever too early to have the conversation. So my kids are 12 and 14, 15, and I talk to them about what I want. My husband is British, so we have, how do we get dad to England? And we laugh about it, but we have these conversations repeatedly, because one of the things that I've seen in the families that I've worked with are the families who have the conversations repeatedly over time. I don't ever talk to them that much, because they're working through it, and they're working through it in a healthy way. So to some extent, I touch base with them, but it's not presented to me as a problem. The people that I work with a lot are elders who have been so independent until about 1992, and their children, they've never had a conversation with their children, their adult children. And then something happens, and it's like, there's just a cascade of events. That's why I think everybody needs to read Being Mortal. But there's this cascade of events, and suddenly their parent, who has always been so independent and has never wanted their children to make any decisions for them, suddenly they have to make decisions, and their children don't want to make decisions because their parents have always been so independent. And that just has this cascade of events. So, the thing that I tell people is, make the conversation as natural and normal as possible early on. My mom is in her late 60s right now. Because we've been through this with my father, we're talking about it all the time. What quality of life do you want? And I'm not just talking about death, I'm talking about in your elder years. And the whole nursing home experience, that's its own kettle of fish, right? Is that the expression? Because I remember as we were preparing, our eldercare attorney said to us, for the nursing home before you're ready for the nursing home. And that was my mom's walking by and shaking her head. And that was so true. And there's a difference between posh nursing homes and the county nursing home. And my dad got kicked out of the posh nursing home, and we put him in the county nursing home. And the first time I went to that nursing home, because I'm a professional, I have the professional part of my head, and then I have the daughter part of me. And the daughter part of me was like, he is never going to be here. And I have to tell you that everything changed. And that for the better. The best thing that happened was that he got kicked out of the posh nursing home, the nursing home that made me feel good, and the county nursing home, which was amazing. It was an institution. Sorry, I should just have my mother come and stand right here and tell you all of this. She's actually the expert. But the county nursing home, they were amazing. And the way that my mother was able to make the staff a part of our family, make the other families who visited their families there a part of our family, so that honestly, the day that my dad died, because of COVID, it was not the death we imagined. We were not there. I still to this day have grief about it, right? We were not there, but I have to tell you, the staff were around him, praying with him, singing to him. And because I knew and loved them, it was the greatest gift to me. And so I often think about end of life stuff as like building a home. My mom and I were just talking about this with like, every time you watch the process of building a home, or right now trying to build a new sanctuary, it's always filled with like these pitfalls, right? Like you don't know that you're going to pull back the foundation and find just like it's going to set you back, right? And that's what this journey is. Like it is one thing that you think, I'm never going to have that happen. And then the boundary just moves back, because the journey past that boundary point, and then you make another boundary point and it takes you past that. And that's why I say so much of this is a journey. And as early as you can have the conversation, as repeatedly as you can have the conversation, and then if you can develop that community that's going to walk with you through it, the more it helps.
I think, Vernon, when you said we're talking about the taboo of having the conversation, that's something that we really try to do at Your Decisions Matter. And people tell me it's a superstitious feeling that they don't even want to bring it up, because if no one is sick, just by bringing up this topic, this is somehow going to bring on some sort of illness. They're afraid they're going to scare their loved one, or just that it's not the right time. And I think, Emilie, what you're saying as well, just by having it be just a normal conversation that you're having with your children, it just makes everyone much more at ease. I think also a lot of people think they're going to have this conversation one time, everything's set in stone, that's it. And if you can change the documents, you can change what you feel. Those are just important things that people just don't think about. Rabbi Friedman?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in about that taboo,
please.
because those of us who turn to the Bible for inspiration, it's right there in the Bible, right? At the end of the book of Genesis, Jacob calls his children and says, this is what I want. This is where I want to be buried. This is the way I want the end of my life to go. So the conversation is as old as time. What's changed, of course, is all the technology, all the medical treatments that are available to us. And so now we have this unique new conversation about extending or prolonging death, as opposed to, enhancing life or treating, a life. So, there's, a gray area that never really existed prior to all of this, this new technology. And I just want to add in again that the stress shows up when there's doubt as to what our loved one wanted and whether we're doing the right thing. Not that the end of life isn't stressful anyway, but the real pain, right? The doubt, the discomfort, the sleepless nights wondering, did I do the right thing? That all emerges when you never had the conversation. And in particular, in the Jewish faith, there's also this question of, well, is what we want, what my loved one wants, in line with what the tradition expects? So then you have like a third person in the room with you, right? You have what your loved one, let's say your parent, what your parent wants, then what the tradition expects, and then what you think ought to happen, right? And so the more that you can hash this out ahead of time and educate yourself about what your faith tradition says about these kinds of end-of-life decisions, about organ donation, about surgery, about any of these issues that come up when you're deciding whether am I prolonging death here or am I enhancing life here? The more you have those conversations, the less stressful it's going to be when that moment arrives. So I know we're all saying the same thing over and over and over again, but hopefully that's going to resonate.
Yeah, I want to expand one concept that Avi just made me think of, that years ago when I was teaching on this, it was a Jewish concept that really helped me as a Christian because we don't have it. And it's the notion of gnosis. Avi, it's like that at some point in Judaism, you can make the distinction that the process of dying has begun. And it strikes me that we live in an era now with the advanced medical technology when the very way that Avi just put it is more poignant and more representative of what we actually live through now than ever. And it's really kind of a hard thing, but once you can say the process of dying has actually begun medically, it helps you to change gears emotionally and spiritually and practically in terms of what comes next and how we're thinking through the care that our loved ones are going through. And that was really freeing for me because, our tradition, since it doesn't have this kind of implicitly active, like, well, you stay alive, you stay alive, you stay alive, and then one day you just die. And where the world we live in now is actually more complicated and more intentional than that. And that's why I think that concept is particularly useful. So thanks.
I met this woman on one of my Zoom.
I also just wanted to mention the circles of grief. Sorry, I wanted to mention the circles of grief because one of the questions that I often ask folks, because sometimes so much of this you're processing, right? Like when you're going through it, you're processing it. So sometimes people are saying things to process their grief, to process what they're going through, but we hear them as decisions when we really just need to understand that they're processing them. And so creating a safe space where people can have those conversations and have them just be them emoting is important. And then learning through the circles of grief that I actually, like, the best person to talk about my grief with might actually not be my mom. It might be somebody 5 circles out who can just hear me for what it is, as opposed to in that inner tight circle where there's so many layers of complexity. And that's partly what in faith communities, that's what we try to create, are circles where people are outside of the intensity of the relationships in order to be able to hear us into becoming. And that's something that has been very helpful to me. I've had to be very intentional with people to say, who is the best person for you to talk to about this, who can actually just hear you for where you are right now, as opposed to who's going to prescribe meaning or take it as you making a mandate that your father can never go into. Those people in your life that you can talk to, and that's been really helpful. The other thing I wanted to say to my colleagues is the other thing that I'm seeing is a lot of people who have long-term chronic illnesses that are terminal, but they're going to live for a long time. And so it's actually changed the conversation to be so much more of a conversation about quality of life when death is there, and wondered if you all had seen that too.
No, definitely. It's something that we've seen, and again, it is trying to have allow space for the family, for the person going through, to truly have that honest conversation, and to be able to again just acknowledge that they're not really sure, and to be able to just it's okay to talk about quality of life, you know, because that is something that plays a part. You know, we had a parishioner whose family member was in overlook, and at the time, you know, had been intubated. And the doctors told them, you know, that, you know, if we do this again, this is going to, you know, it's going to hurt. The person's really, you know, I mean, from their medical, the person is going to expire. You know, and so they were questioning, you know, that if they had to be intubated again, you know, could they make that decision? So they called us up and said, listen, you've got the information from the doctors, and you know, if your loved one does that, you know what your loved one's wishes are. The theological aspect came in is, well, what if God, you know, God has the last word? Well, you know, I mean, I hear you and I understand that, you know, and I know that's what you want, but I do think that God will understand that if you make the best decision you can make, that you would have to believe and trust in this God who would understand that you know, and to be able to help them to be comfortable with that. And so that was, you know, something that we had to deal with, and how do I help that family to accept that?
Yeah.
There is a question in the chat. So about helping families who have not had the conversation guided by faith. So I know that as clergy, we're uniquely positioned to influence these experiences. But I think the way that we do it is something that anyone can do, and that is through I statements, right? These are things that I have found helpful. These are things that I am doing with my family. These are things that I want my family to know about me and my priorities and my values. And then I think an organization like SAGE is uniquely positioned to have information available from multiple faiths, so that regardless of the faith of the client or family, you know where the websites are, where the documents are. I know that, for example, my movement in Judaism has a document, advanced medical directives, that you know, isn't, you know, just a set document, but is a conversation. Like, do you want A, B, C, or D, right? There are different approaches, right? When, you know, when there are decisions to be made about surgery, when there are decisions to be made about intubation, when there are decisions to be made about, you know, an experimental therapy or treatment, you can think ahead what you want those to be. So I think that if we have these conversations and make these I statements about how helpful this was in the life of my family, because I had this conversation with my parents, that's going to have an influence, because we have all witnessed the benefit of these conversations, and we've seen the pain and anguish over, you know, and regret over not having had the conversations. And so obviously you can't force someone to do something they don't want to do. And there, you know, it's hard to overcome taboo. It's hard to overcome an ingrained, you know, approach in your family. We all know that our families are all unique systems. But if you can see the benefit, you know, you're motivated to try and change that dynamic.
We have another question in the chat. Do you find that most faith leaders are often trained to help counsel people trying to make healthcare and end-of-life decisions?
Not yet. Yeah.
I think, and Emilie, you said this to me before this webinar, that personal stories are so powerful. And a lot of people change what they want for, let's say, their mother at end of life, when they had a very bad situation with their father, when there was no conversation, that maybe that parent had medical interventions that caused more harm than good, as you were talking about, Reverend Williams. So just, we don't have that much time left, but I know I asked you all just to think of a story from your tradition that shapes your guidance on how you counsel people on talking about advanced care planning. Or if you just want to make a final remark as well, that's fine too.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to run, so I'm going to jump in here.
Okay.
So to that prior question, I just want to say that most ordination programs now do require some sort of CPE, clinical pastoral education units, and people coming into clergy situations do have some experience, but look, at the end of the day, and going through it is the best experience, whether it be with members of your community or members of your family. So that's one piece. Before I came to New Jersey, I was in Pittsburgh, and in my previous congregation, I'll never forget, it was while I was interviewing to come here to New Jersey, I actually had to delay my trip to New Jersey because a 49-year-old member of my community had a brain aneurysm, totally healthy guy, father of 2 teenage daughters, husband, and no one ever expected it. Because of the kind of injury that it was, his body was completely fine, but he'd never talked about whether he wanted to be an organ donor or not. Even though he was a great candidate to be an organ donor, this family had never imagined what life was going to be without him at 49 years of age. There were high school graduations and college graduations and weddings to be planning, not funerals. That's just one of those moments where you realize that, as Emilie said earlier, it's never too soon to have the conversation. And sometimes it's even easier to have it in like this hypothetical kind of conversation, right? Like, my death is 40 years off, so yeah, let's talk about it, as opposed to this is going to happen next week, we got to make some decisions. So again, if you come to it with the right approach, you can have a really healthy and beneficial conversation.
Thanks. And I know you have to go, so if you need to leave, it's totally fine. Thank you. I just wanted to get to this question in the chat. Any thoughts on where the soul or spirit or consciousness of our loved one is once they are no longer the person we knew, as in a coma or suffering from Alzheimer's? Does it remain with the body until the last breath?
Whew.
Vernon?
I'm gonna go to the professor on that one. I mean, our tradition, I mean, to be honest, I mean, there's no way for us to say for certain. Our tradition teaches that, that soul stays there until the last breath. But is that exactly what happens? I mean, as a clergy person and as a person of faith, I have to admit for myself, I'm not sure. I can't say for certain. I do know what we teach. I do know what what is said. But that is one of those mysteries. I just cannot answer for certain.
Only thing I would say about it, I can't answer it either. Although now that you've raised that, I'll kind of think about that and actually look up a couple things because I'm curious what our tradition actually teaches. My mom died from Alzheimer's, and it was a very long. She lived like 14 years or 15 years with Alzheimer's, a really long time. And I just remember, they call it the long goodbye. And it really is literally that way, because as her rational capacity was being erased and her short-term memory was going, what the literature didn't really explain, although it's painfully obvious to everyone who's close to her, is that her emotional, her emotional life began to atrophy and then really go to blank at the very end. And that was the hardest thing about that, is towards the end, the last probably year and a half, when I'd go see her and I'd hug her, and she really had no responsiveness at all, and and it was very difficult. But I'll tell you one story about this that makes me wonder about that. I brought my granddaughters with me the last time. They'd never met their great grandmother. They were only like 5 years old at the time, 6, and we were not sure whether it was a good thing or a bad thing to take them to see her in that compromised position. But we did, and they wanted to go. And I told the girls, I said, all you need to do is just love her and give her some hugs on both sides. So I'm going to sit in front of her and I'm going to hug her, and you two can sit on either side of her and give her some hugs. And my mother has had a lifelong condition of her hands shake. She has a tremor in her hand, and it got worse as she got older. And this is at the very end of her life. And as we're sitting there and I'm talking to her and the girls are hugging her, my granddaughter says to me, "Papa, it's a miracle. Her hands stopped shaking." And I think at some deep level, the reason that happened, who knows, but I think it's because she recognized that she was with her people.
Mm-hmm.
And that that's the last thing to go. And so I would say that there's something that goes on with that all the way to the very end.
And if I could just piggyback on that, my mom, when my mom had terminal cancer, she had colon cancer, and it happened my freshman year of college. So I was away at college. I get the call and say, "Come back this weekend. We expect her to die." And so I had come back that weekend, and we spent all weekend at the hospital with her. She had said nothing. She made no movement or anything. So Friday, Saturday night, all weekend. So come Sunday afternoon, I had to make a decision because she had not died. I had to make a decision as to whether I go back to school or I stay there. And while we were at the hospital, well, that Sunday morning, they called us up and said, "Get to the hospital right away. We expect it to be any minute." So we were there for about 6 or 7 hours or so. And my dad looks at me and says, "You need to go back to school. Nothing's changed. So, we'll call you." And the minute, so I said to my mom, "I'll see you when I get back." And the minute I said that, just as clear as day, she says, I'll be waiting on you." And so where we thought that, there was no activity, there was nothing. So somehow she was able to actually audibly respond, and she did it so clear. At least for me, it gave me some hope that, well, maybe there is a chance here. And so that's why, it's very difficult to say, when does, that moment of the soul, from us parting the body actually happens. That's why I say, I don't know. I still know that is still my loved one until their last breath.
I just want to thank both of you for those stories. And like these are the stories, as I was talking to Nina, these are the stories that sort of change that help our faiths evolve. And I think that the element that I would bring from my tradition is, no matter, we have to humanize things. Like we can never deny another person's humanity. And so my worry about saying that the soul is gone before the person has died is that then, at least in our system, we start to treat people like they're gone before they're gone. And so I would say, from my tradition, God is a loving God, and you bring love and compassion to the day they die, and actually even beyond that. I mean, the tradition from the Jewish faith of having a group of people who lovingly wrap the body and who are with the body until it is buried. I mean, that to me is humanizing creation and making creation sacred. And that's, like, as Reverend Rush and Reverend Williams are saying, we don't really know if the soul is still there, but you better believe that I'm going to act as if that is true, so that we never dehumanize a person or creation.
Yeah.
Well, thank all of you for sharing your wisdom and your personal stories. We really appreciate it. And I think everyone really learned a lot from this webinar. We've gone a little bit over, so I think we should end now. But thank you so much.
Yeah, Nina, preachers can talk.
Save Ray.
Thank you, Nina, for
This
this.
was wonderful. It was really,
Thank
really
you, guys.
wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
It's great to see you. Be good.
Take care.